Good. All right. Hi, everyone. As usual, my name is Will Critchlow, founder at SearchPilot, and I do these live streams almost every week, almost always at this time. We're on time for once. This is Tuesday at 4:15 p.m. UK time, 11:15 a.m. on the East Coast, 8:15 a.m. on the West Coast, and this is when I try and do them. So if you're interested, come along this time every week. It's on my Twitter and LinkedIn, where I'm at Will Critchlow, and it's on the SearchPilot YouTube, which is at SearchPilot over there. And I've been amusing myself this week with my money in the thumbnail for this video. I don't carry a lot of cash generally these days, and certainly not a lot of dollars because I don't live in the US. And so all I had was this random. I had like 120 and one single dollar bill. So high roller this week. Obviously like a stack of hundreds would have been better, I guess. But I love you all, but I didn't go quite that far. So anyway, what we're going to talk about, the reason I had the dollar bill in the thumbnail of the video, we're talking a little bit about cost savings this week, specifically Google saving costs. And I think that I've got a couple of theories that are tied together that potentially explain some things that are going on and tie together a few different threads that I thought might be interesting. Google has long felt invincible, I think. It's been hard to imagine where a threat might come from to their search dominance. To be fair, I think they might have found their way to the greatest example of product market fit of all time. The anecdotes from those early days of monetization are wild. If I remember correctly, Eric Schmidt insisted that they keep their revenue numbers secret because they were embarrassingly good. Can you imagine? I mean, anybody who's run a business, we all dream of product market fit, and we all try to understand what that means and how much we've got it and whether we're there. And I think that's probably a fairly good sign that you're just when you're making embarrassing amounts of money. So they started as this proverbial rocket ship, but since then they've become kind of this just money printing machine, right? I'm going to pull up my screen share because I've got a couple of resources that I wanted to talk about this week. So yeah, just like it's pretty incredible what they've achieved in the public markets. This chart shows their revenue over the last 15 years or so. But what I wanted to point to actually was the wild, just quite how stable this is. This is year over year quarterly growth, 20%, basically just like all the way along. Obviously, a couple of blips here and there. I think we can let them off Q1, Q2, 2020. But and that came back in delayed growth. Some challenges recently, but just look at this run. This run is just absolute incredible growth, but also incredible consistency. And I think there are two parts to why they're worth now trillions of dollars. One is just the scale of that revenue and profit machine, but the other is that consistency. That quarter in, quarter out, delivering the numbers that the market wants, needs, and expects. And I've talked before about how there have been plausible threats to search growth in the past. Easy to forget now, but everyone was very excited about social media as a threat to search in the late 2000s. There was this idea that maybe instead of Googling best restaurant, you would ask your Facebook friends where to go for dinner. That, of course, did happen, but it didn't turn out to cannibalize search particularly. It turned out to be mainly incremental to search. I don't know whether that's because your friends then Google and give you the recommendations from there, or whether you don't trust them and you check it out. Anyway, I still am looking for all-time search query volume or all-time outbound clicks from search. In other words, total organic search traffic. And then other channels layered on top of that. I'm still looking for that data. If anybody has that, do let me know. Obviously some of it will be estimates, but I'm very, very interested to be able to show when that grew, when it didn't, when it was expected to have challenges and how those turned out to be. Because predictions are tough. There's the famous quote, I don't remember who it's from. Prediction is a physicist, I think. Predictions are tough, especially about the future. And this is an area where we just see folks get stuff wrong repeatedly. I think, I don't know if anybody remembers, I think it was ComScore famously said 50% of all searches would be voice searches by 2020, which led to my brother and I having this conversation the other day, asking Google to set a timer. Is that a search query? I think it's a generous interpretation at best, but it's interesting to start thinking through what is search? What is the job to be done by search? What other jobs is it doing right now? Which of those are going to get disambiguated by large language models or smart agents or whatever else it might be? And even when search is the answer, when do we want machine generated content on the other end of it, and so forth? But I guess the point here is predictions are hard. But this latest concern is around AI, large language models in particular, as a threat to search, as a threat to search volume, as a threat to Google. I actually think that the bigger threat is probably the web going to shit. If you have if the entire web just becomes LLMs feeding on themselves, then that's a bigger problem in my view than people stopping searching and instead using large language models. There is some data to support that side of the view. So Rand shared this data. Well, first of all, he shared the Gartner prediction by 2026, Google's going to lose a quarter of all queries to AI. I don't think that's likely. And Rand's partner, Datos, don't know how you pronounce that, has rebutted this. So Google, the average Google user, returning repeatedly over 120-day period, and the average visitor to OpenAI falling off very quickly. And there's been a range of data showing that this doesn't seem to be leading to a move away from Google, even as we've seen the explosive growth of ChatGPT. Just anecdotally, I've kind of found this. I am a subscriber to ChatGPT, and I'm also using the advanced Gemini model from Google. And I do use them for stuff. But I find it's a bit sporadic. It's like magic, but it's still not quite there as a product yet. And it does feel to me like it's a different product solving a slightly different problem and job to be done than search is. But all of this stuff is leading to more uncertainty. As I've said before, bad vibes, more pressure on the organic search channel than I remember seeing before for a long time, maybe since the global financial crisis. I'm hearing more and more stories of leadership teams exerting serious pressure on channel leaders and asking for plans to close that gap to the goal or to return to growth if they've had a down or a flat year. And that accountability and pressure is something that comes periodically. Right? There are sometimes good times. You can see it in Google's growth. I'm sure that in late 2021 there wasn't a lot of cost control pressure, but you can see why that cost control might have returned in the last 12 to 18 months. And it's similar in all of our businesses. When times are good, when times are easy, the pressure and the accountability isn't necessarily there. But when tough times return, interest rates rise, inflation kicks in, any of these kind of things take hold, then that's when you find the pressure kicks in, and that's when your boss might turn to you and say, what is your plan? So if that's you, if you're under pressure to come up with the major initiative for this next year to drive organic search growth for a large and mature website, then you should get in touch with us, because that's exactly what SearchPilot is good for. You can get a demo by going to searchpilot.com/live and filling in the form. Let me pull that up for you. That looks like this. And you can get all of the resources from these live streams. So this form in particular, fill this out and you'll get a walkthrough of the platform, and we'll be happy to talk to you about your current testing initiatives, but also how building an experimentation program can help you achieve your objectives for this year and sort out the issues that might be arising. There's other resources here that you might find interesting. Sign up for our latest case studies, get our customer success stories. These might be useful to you if you are in this situation where leadership is asking you for initiatives to drive real growth. If you're new to SEO testing, we've got a PDF that can get you up to speed that you can share with your boss or with others around the organization. And of course, we've got tons of SEO test results. So you can get access to the back catalog as well as sign up to the email list to get new ones when they're published. And we've been brought in by a number of brands, large brands you've heard of, to do exactly this. You can find just some of the logos on our website. Some of our biggest customers are still anonymous, but we did have a major win recently. We're going to be doing some PR around it. They're up for talking about it, so watch this space. Anyway, so that's a little diversion into, if you're under pressure and you're getting pressure and demands for accountability around organic search, searchpilot.com/live. But I don't think all of this stuff is actually a sign that Google's under threat, but there are signs of cost control going on. So this post from Gary I thought was very interesting. My mission this year is to figure out how to crawl less. He says even less. I think it's interesting to frame it that way, actually. I wouldn't have said, I would have said they crawl an awful lot, but crawl even less and have fewer bites on the wire. And he says the perception that Google is crawling less is not true. He says in the grand scheme of things, that's not the case. My reading of that is it is down, but it's not down as much as everybody might think it is. And he says they do want to crawl less. And I think some of this might be cost driven. There have been some reorgs, some layoffs that seem to be targeted at cost savings as well. We saw a Python team get laid off and replaced by a team doing a similar thing, but in a lower cost jurisdiction. I don't remember where they moved them to. But I think this is interesting. So seeing this come from the official line. And I've got some theories. I've been thinking about this. I was talking to a lot of people at Brighton SEO. So I was at Brighton SEO at the end of last week, and we'll talk a little bit more about Brighton in a second. But this first point is that I think it must be spectacularly expensive to render all the JavaScript that Google is now rendering. Google is rendering basically the entire web every time they crawl it, apparently. And I think they actually made some tactical errors here. So by saying that they can render any JavaScript, they led everybody obviously to become more JavaScript reliant, not to worry about it, just to push that problem onto Google. I think that was a tactical mistake. I think that they would have been better taking the route that they did with Mobilegeddon and with HTTPS. So if you remember, Mobilegeddon was saying we're going to be moving over to mobile first indexing, and so your mobile website performance and content and link structure and all these things become ranking factors in a way that they didn't used to be, forcing sites to move to mobile friendly. HTTPS was even more egregious. This was essentially just saying, it's a ranking factor now. It might be a very, very small one. They didn't say the second part, of course, but by saying it was a ranking factor, they sped the adoption of secure browsing. And to be clear, I think this is a really good thing. Both of those things, mobile friendliness and security, both great for the ecosystem, for the web at large. But in both cases, very much in Google's interest. And Google pushed that behavior change by turning those things into ranking factors. And I think they could have done the same thing here. They could have discouraged heavy JavaScript reliance, in particular reliance on JavaScript for core words and text on the page. And I think if they'd made words in source HTML a ranking factor, or said words in source HTML was a ranking factor, they would have saved themselves a lot of pain, trouble, and expense. And I think they could have avoided a lot of it. Maybe I'm off track here. I'd be very interested to hear other people's thoughts about this. But it ties together, and it ties together with a few other areas. And so if they're looking to save money here, I don't think it's across the board. They just spent spectacular amount of money on NVIDIA GPUs for training large language models. Clearly no easing up on the CapEx side. Building the data centers is a huge cost. But this like OpEx of search, I think is fascinating. And it does play into the LLM stuff as well. I I think I was talking to someone the other day. In fact, I think it was Tom Capper. Tom Capper gave a great presentation at Brighton about what we've seen with LLMs in search so far. So Bing being the biggest and best example outside of Google, and probably the one pushing hardest and being the first mover competitor really with the ChatGPT integration. And what we've seen, what he's seen in his research, is that LLM generated element of many Bing searches has moved down the page out of prominence. It's not necessarily loading on every search, on fewer searches than it needs to be. Seems to be more cached. I think that's I think caching that stuff is going to make a ton of sense. I talked before about how what Google really needs is to address the vibes most. And the vibes are addressed by being seen to take the LLM in search results question seriously, but actually probably not by putting LLM generated stuff in the search results. I think at the moment it causes more trouble than it's worth. It's slow, it's expensive, probably a poor user experience. Certainly the slowness uh, leads to that. Search accuracy probably falls. It starts hallucinating about all kinds of things. Monetization is difficult to put adverts in there. In so many ways, I think Google would be better being able to say they were doing it, but not have to actually do it. Which is why I'm kind of fond of this idea that they might do a Google Prime, roll it into Google One or something, but start making it a paid for premium service. And then they can say, look, it's so good. We're so all in on this that only our premium search experience has the option to opt in to LLM generated summaries of search results or something. And of course, nobody will. Very few people pay for it. Very few of those will opt in. So they can say they're doing it without having to actually do it. And it looks like they're putting a ton of effort and really putting everything behind it. When in fact, the opposite is the case, because I'm actually more bullish on kind of standard web search. Um, anyway, back to the JavaScript rendering thing. So LLM generation we know is expensive. JavaScript rendering, though, must be spectacularly expensive. And we've seen this discussion from Gary saying he wants to crawl less as well. This is not exactly the same as rendering, but it's in that same ballpark. And I think we're going to have, well, we certainly are going to have some interesting data soon. We've been doing some research into how JavaScript is executed by Google, when it is, when it isn't. And that's leading to some very, very interesting results. I'm teasing them slightly. We're going to be publishing new content soon on this. But our experiments are showing a lot of heuristics, a lot of caching, a lot of not actually rendering JavaScript, which is quite consistent with what what you'd expect to happen if it was under this kind of pressure. So it's not just that there are some forms of JavaScript that are uninterpretable by Google or have issues being interpreted, but it's also the case that for cost reasons, I assume, they're not executing everything fully all the time on every run. And this has real implications for trying to test with JavaScript alone and for all kinds of other uses of client-side integration with different tools. So more to come on that. While I'm talking about Brighton SEO, I've got a couple of other points that I thought well, perhaps worth discussing. One is, I really think we need a third party, outside of Google, a third party external search quality report over time. If anybody is working on this, please do get in touch. Be happy to amplify it. I really, really would love to see something that compares our expectations and our understanding as search experts who are doing non-representative, like very advanced queries all the time, with what real users think. I guess you do it as some kind of panel, some kind of a bit like kind of Nielsen data or whatever. There probably need to be an element of blind testing. So I know some folks have done this as one-off studies, comparing, if you take the logo off and you compare Google to Bing, to DuckDuckGo or whatever, and asking people which they prefer. Definitely need to be some element of that. I'm not aware of anyone doing this longitudinally. In other words, doing this survey repeatedly over time and seeing trends in the data, because I think we're somewhere on some spectrum from Google has this data internally, knows there is no real problem, it's just vibes, right? That we think search quality's got bad, but actually it hasn't. We're just upset about a small subset of queries that aren't truly representative and aren't representative of how most people view it. It's possible. The other extreme is it's bad and Google knows it's bad. And there is actually a real drop off. There's a drop off in quality of Google compared to other search engines. So you would see that in the relative data if Google has dropped compared to, say, Bing. Or there's a possibility somewhere in the middle, which is it is worse, but it's worse in a kind of consistent way, in the sense of it's worse only in the same way that the web has got worse. And so you'd see that show up in declining confidence or happiness over time, spread across different search engines. I don't know which situation we're in. I think we're somewhere between 1 and 2. I don't think it's got radically worse at Google compared to everywhere else. But there are some signs in that direction, and so all this cost saving stuff factors into, it can lead to poor decisions, poor long-term decisions in particular. So anyway, if you're working on, or you know anybody working on, an external search quality report done over time, I would be very, very interested to see that data. While we're speaking of Brighton, I gave a talk there about Googlebot and Search Console data, particularly as it relates to testing, unsurprisingly, that being what we know best. And I'm not going to run through the whole talk just now, but just a very quick one. It was an optimistic talk about how organic search is, for many large websites, their biggest channel, still their biggest opportunity, but their least well understood channel. I talked about that before. I covered what we do at SearchPilot and how it works, which, again, I'm not going to get into here, and some test improvements. But two things I did want to mention and leave you with, basically the takeaways of the talk. One is we've been integrating Googlebot data where we can into our test analysis, and we hoped to be able to get more statistically significant winners by incorporating that data. The argument basically goes that at this point, where only half the pages have been, only half the organic sessions are landing on pages that have been recrawled since the test was rolled out, it's only possible for half the effect to be visible in the data. And that gradually increases, of course, 3/4 by this point, up to 90% of the effect potentially visible by the time the site section has been largely recrawled. But this data so far has not yielded the improvements in search, in test analysis that we hoped we might see. Still doing some R&D, still might do. But in the meantime, we have got a benefit that is, as I said here, with the meme, we thought we'd get better analysis, but in fact, faster tests has been a big part of the benefit, which is the recrawl is happening quicker on average than I think we guessed it would have. So 90% on this example of organic sessions are landing on pages that have been recrawled since the test launched within 4 days, which is quicker than I think we would have predicted. And sometimes it's even faster than that. And what that means is two things. Firstly, it means we can end inconclusive tests quicker. So with an inconclusive test that's just going sideways, one of the key questions you want to know is has this test been recrawled? Because if it hasn't, the reason we're seeing no benefit is it hasn't been recrawled fully yet. But if it has, then, and we're still seeing nothing, then we can be more inclined to turn it off. And the second thing is that we can shorten those cooldown windows, which is the time between tests. So you either, a winning test, you roll out to 100%, a losing test, you turn off. In either case, that's fluctuations that add noise, and really you want to wait until everything's been recrawled before you run the next test in that site section. If you can shorten those windows, both of these things help you speed up your test cadence, run more tests per month, per quarter. And what I've said many times in an SEO experimentation program is the two KPIs that leadership are going to be keeping a strong eye on are test cadence and win rate. And this speaks directly to improving that test cadence. Incidentally, if you are interested in building an effective SEO experimentation program, if you head over to the SearchPilot Twitter account, and you will find that we've just announced a sequence of webinars focused specifically on building an effective SEO experimentation program. So this is not about running individually good tests, it's about building an effective experimentation culture, environment, and processes, systems. Sam, who's going to be leading this, is in our professional services team and is one of the people who's got more experience than I think anyone in the world, working with the best teams at large websites on building effective experimentation programs. So if you're interested, head on over to Twitter SearchPilot on Twitter, which is at SearchPilot, and you can join this two-part webinar series in building an effective experimentation program. Key part: test speed, test cadence, and Googlebot turns out to be good for that. The second thing was about Search Console data. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the problems of this, but just to briefly point out that we are now gathering this data, and what we're finding is, so this is showing the before and after of the control and before and after of the variant in ranking. And remember that lower rank numbers are better. So moving from position 1 to position 3 is a good thing. So here we're moving from kind of position 8-ish to position 7 or so in the variant, but not in the control. And therefore we can see that this experiment is likely to be a winner because of ranking changes. And so skipping to the punchline, there were a lot of problems with it, which we can talk about another day. But the punchline was Googlebot data lets us run more tests faster, and Search Console data is good for explaining why something has been a winner. But for all those problems that we'll come back to, Search Console data is not good for declaring winners or discovering, detecting, and being confident about winners. So anyway, that's what I talked about at Brighton. If you want more information, it's very easy to find me. I'm at Will Critchlow on Twitter and LinkedIn, and you can drop me a direct message on either of those places. To finish up today, I thought that I would just mention one other thing around. So we've talked a lot about this kind of cost-saving driven stuff. There's other turbulence going on with Google as well. In particular, the most recent update has been traumatic for many site owners, particularly a lot of smaller site owners, affiliates, and sites that have been struggling since the helpful content update in some cases. And I thought I'd just mention a couple of challenges that I have seen and perspectives that I think are potentially important here. The first is there's clearly a communications problem from Google. We saw examples of sites getting hit in this update literally at the same time as Google photographers were visiting to take photos to include in Google case studies about how great these websites are. So there's some kind of disconnect there. I'm not the expert in diving into the analysis of exactly who's been the winners and who's been the losers. I'm looking at this from a little bit of a step removed. I would recommend Lily Ray's analysis if you do want to dive deeper in. There's definitely a communication challenge, and I've seen a couple of plausible and tempting takes on all of this that I think are wrong, and I thought I'd just mention. One is that it turns out we as an industry didn't notice that Google had finished rolling out this update a week ago. Right, so a week passed, we're still talking about it being in action, partly again back to the communication thing, because Google had heavily suggested, strongly suggested, heavily hinted that was the case, and we didn't notice. And there's been some chatter that this shows that SEOs don't know what they're talking about. I don't actually think that's the case. I don't think it's a failure. I personally haven't tried to analyze when one particular update ends and another one begins, but I can't even theoretically think about how that could be done with great accuracy. Be interested to hear ideas if anybody has any. All I can think of is to define some level of like ranking turbulence that you have to fall below before you declare an update over. But that could be wrong in either direction. And as I understand it, there was still a lot of turbulence in this last week. But also the right tail of an update could be arbitrarily long. So an update could still be rolling out while still being almost undetectable in rank tracking changes. So I don't think that is a productive way forward, especially because that long kind of right tail of the update, it starts to overlap with all kinds of normal changes, normal experiments, normal algorithm updates, etc. And I do think there's been some, is disinformation too strong? Maybe some confusing information coming out of Google itself. I've also seen criticism of people being worried about updates, saying that if you're doing SEO, quote unquote, right, you shouldn't worry about the impact of algorithm updates, which I also think this is wrong. I see philosophically where it's coming from, and I'd love for that to be true. But I do think that there's a couple of things. I think firstly it's asymmetric. If an update leads to a large increase in your visibility, that's nice, it's lovely, but there's no guarantee that it's permanent. And sure, nice vibes. Whereas severe drop is at best case going to lead to fire drills and having to do a ton more work, potentially much worse. Livelihoods are at risk, jobs are at risk, and I think uh, I I'm probably as bullish as anyone that search quality concerns are at least as much about vibes as about reality. But I definitely wouldn't go as far as to say that there are no false negatives. So it is certainly possible to be doing everything right and still to get hit by an algorithm update. And I think it's just human nature as well that, there's research showing that we're much more concerned about losing something we have than about gaining something that we don't yet have. So I don't think it says anything really about the SEO industry, its spamminess or otherwise. I think this is just human nature, and I don't even know if it's true that it's getting disproportionate. That this is disproportionately how people think, because of course it's also true that we hear about the cases of people worrying. Much more likely to post those worries than to say I'm not worried actually. So there's a visibility bias as well. But anyway, ending on maybe a little bit of a ramble there, but I'm going to be sharing links to all the things I've talked about today. We're talking about Google, its revenue consistency, the threat that may or may not exist from voice search, social media, large language models, into are they engaged? Are they trying to save costs? Do they need to save costs? And what are the impacts of cost savings on us, particularly around potential ranking and JavaScript execution changes? And anyway, I'll share all of these links on Twitter and LinkedIn, which is also where you can join in future weeks for these live streams. So typically around this time, so Tuesday around 4:30 p.m. UK time, which is 4:15 p.m. UK time, which is 11:15 a.m. on the East Coast and 8:15 a.m. on the West Coast. And if you head to searchpilot.com/live, you can get all the resources as well as a demo of SearchPilot if you're interested in that. Otherwise, live stream will be on my Twitter and LinkedIn at Will Critchlow, as well as the SearchPilot YouTube next week. All right, take care.